Okay, hello. Good evening, friends. Thank you for joining us for our historical series, Chapter 3. If you pioneers could take a few minutes to tell us about yourselves and your connection to DMS, we can all get to know the people that made it possible. So, Mr. Martin, would you, since you're right on the top, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and your connection to DMS?
Okay, let's see. I think my original connection to DMS was through Gina Hahn and Nancy DeBasic and their preschool play group that was operating over in Mesa. And that play group, I had two daughters and of course my wife then, Kim, found out about it through something I wasn't involved in, which was the Manzanita group of the Anthroposophical Society with Beth Farley. And they found out, they were doing some studying and did some, attended some lectures about Waldorf education and anthroposophy. And so Kim found out about that preschool playgroup that was utilizing Waldorf concepts. And so I went to check out that school with Kim, and our two oldest daughters at that time was very young, Lily and Tess, and fell in love with it. The family did. It was kind of a struggle for me. At that time, I was teaching traditional public high school over in the West Valley. And I had confidence that Kim knew what was going on, but I didn't know what was going on. And so I think, like I have come to find over the last 25, 30 years, that dads kind of just have to go on faith with Waldorf education. And in my experience, it's very much a mother's intuition, which kind of transcends and trumps, dads in some way for me. And so she was the one that said, this, I can make this work. And I said, honey, if you think this is what it's going to be, which we know we don't want a regular school, a regular public education like what I had and what I was teaching, then I was 100% behind it. So that was the first introduction. It was before there was a Desert Marigold. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure I can remember the name of their playgroup anymore.
What year was that?
Let's see, Lily would have been like 5, so maybe 1990. No, it would have been before that, maybe 1988, Amy, about then when Beth and all those guys were hanging out.
That was before my time with the school, but I think, it was probably the early 90s. Because I know I got connected. The school started fall of 1994, and that's when I first visited. And I think there were at least a couple of years of the in-home play groups before that.
Yeah, I think Lily, who was born in 85, I think she might have been just before she started going to Holdeman when they opened up and moved, and then she couldn't go any longer. So I think it was about right around 1990.
Wow.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Amy, would you mind going next since you're the next person on our screen?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
I'm Amy Bird, and my first connection with Desert Marigold was, like I said, in the fall of 1994. I was living in Tucson and realized I was going to be moving to Phoenix, was not at all happy about it. And one of the things that really helped me start to connect with the new place was that I had just learned about Waldorf education in Tucson. I'd been going to a play group there, and to know that there was this initiative that I could get involved in. So my daughter started going to the preschool when she was 3, and I actually lived just a few blocks away from where Michael lived at the time. And Kim would have a play group or like a handwork circle in her house. So I brought my son at the time, who was a baby, there. And that's where I learned about a lot of the Waldorf crafts and handwork and things like that. And I actually remember that right around that time, Michael, you got bit by a black widow and
Oh,
got really sick from it. And
yeah.
I was concerned about you, and also really relieved that the spider bit you and not any of the babies. So just so, so you know, but that was when I got involved. And then, you know, I was a parent, I became a volunteer, I became a board member. I did the Waldorf administrative training. I was the administrator for about 10 years, including the year that this high school started, and then was a development director, and left in 2015 and to work for RSF Social Finance, where I still am.
Thank you very much. Jimmy, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Jimmy Wabi. My first introduction to DMS was really through my cousin in Toronto. Him and his wife was a kindergarten teacher at the Waldorf School in Toronto. And before Gina and I were even married, they kind of sat us down and taught us about Waldorf or introduced us to Waldorf. So in '99, we toured the school, just drove by and looked at it, and like, interesting, you know, the straw bale was being built at the time, and you know, it looked, the entire area looked nice. It was about 20 minutes away from our house. I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm an engineer. I'm like, I don't know about this method of education and this dirt lot and the straw bale building and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, you know, no big deal. We kind of filed it away and didn't even think about schooling yet till Samia was born. And that was in 2003. And at that moment, I held her and I looked at her and I said, yeah, I don't know.
Oh,
We're just getting to the really good part there. I mean, it's all good, but that was an especially good part.
Jimmy, you're frozen.
Waldorf education.
Oh, are you back?
just for a second. Hey, Barb, you're still muted.
Jimmy, are you back or are you still frozen?
I think he's
Got it.
frozen.
Okay, Jill, what should I do in this situation? Oh,
Oh, he's gonna
he dropped off. Okay,
well,
he's
just
gonna,
reconnect. Yeah. So watch for him to come back on.
okay.
Bad connections happen. Here he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is he back on?
Okay, how about
Hi,
now?
Jimmy. I'm so sorry. That's great. You fell off right when you said my daughter was born. I held her in my arms. That was all we heard.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, it was a big pause, you know, at the time, you know, just holding her and looking at her. But no, it was one of those times when you look at your child and you figure out how you're going to raise them and what are you going to do. And you know, the education was a big part of it. And at that point, really, we started having this conversation about Waldorf education, and that's the path we wanted to take with our children. And that was the decision. So in 2005, we joined DMS with a play group where Gina and Samia and Marina at the time, also Marina was like 3 months old, you know, they would come to playgroup all the time, and we just got to know the school really well. And I became a volunteer doing whatever odd jobs there are and helping out any which way I can. And then joined the board in 2009 and was on there for 10 years. 9 years out of those was as board president. And, and we're still there. Samia just graduated this year, so,
Congratulations.
yeah, so.
That's
very-
exciting. Thank you.
yeah.
Jill, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jill Thomas, and I was introduced to Waldorf education. And so I had a marketing degree and an East Asian Studies degree, but I read about it. And what I remember is in the Wall Street Journal, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So this would have been in the early 80s in college, doing my degrees. And so we all of a sudden have our first child. And he was 2 and he was going down the street to a friend's house who had 2 little girls and was there, in the fall. And then right before Christmas, she's like, well, Olivia got into Prince of Peace. I'm like, what do these words mean? And she's like, well, Olivia will go to preschool. I'm like, okay, well, Zachary will still come to your house. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm like, what? He was an only child. It was like 2 mornings a week for 2 hours. So I'm like, I was working, 30 hours a week. So I'm like, ugh. So I open up the Yellow Pages and I see this ad for Waldorf. And I'm like, oh, I remember that. I remember reading that. So I write down the address. I'm sure I talked to Amy. It's 1989. And I drive down there and I'm thinking, I don't know where I'm going. Like, oh, there's 2 houses that don't have electricity hooked up to them. And here's a road that looks like it's a dirt road. And I pulled onto the campus, which at the time was where the animals are, that by the farmhouse, that was our only entrance. And how I remember it is the kids are hanging from the trees, in Sound of Music. Okay, they didn't have matching outfits, but they're running around, there's chickens and the kids are they're playing in mud. And I thought, ooh, Zachary would love this. So he was supposed to be 3 and potty trained. So in January, he was neither 3 nor potty trained, but he did start. And we were there then until a year ago. Our youngest of 3, she graduated from the high school. The boys went through 8th grade. And I did kind of what a lot of people do in Waldorf, is started out as a parent, then started volunteering, parent council, the festivals, was on the board, joined the board, and then was board president for 10 or 11 years. And then Jimmy took over, and then got to be a parent while our daughter graduated a year ago and our boys went through 8th grade there. So we were there a total of, I think, 21 or 22 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. Oh, and Michael, could I ask you, did you want to add anything that would get us up to the point of high school, or were you just a dad, not just a dad, but I mean, you just were your wife was feeling it and you were just along for the ride, or how would you get yourself up to a high school point at our school?
Wow, that's literally almost 20 years. The high school was 2009 and it was 1990. So
were you at a just a parent volunteer up until that point, or did you do any stints on the board or?
no, I was kind of just grunt labor. I worked on the straw bale. I remember some late nights with some late nights working on that straw bale and the deadlines came, concrete the next morning, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you were.
Yes, you know what? Yeah, I think somewhere in there, it must be around 2000 and I don't know. I guess it must have been around 2005 or 2004. I had been out starting other charter schools, working up at the Mountain Oak School. I was an interim administrator up there when my kids were going there and Kim was in the kindergarten. Then we went to Santa Fe and I served on some committees there. Then we came back to Mountain Oak again for a year, and then we wound up back at Desert Marigold. So
Wow.
My boys started out at Desert Marigold. As a matter of fact, they were some of the first kids. They were at the bungalow over on what was it? Not Wheaton. What was the name of that street?
Yeah, Witten, I believe
Witten,
they
yeah,
said
Witten.
in the first interview.
Yeah, and so they were there. Theo and Clay were both there. And so then when the group got together, including Amy, and made the deal on the 28th Street property, they were part of that first class that moved out of the kindergarten. And Theo was in that first grade that opened up with Isabel Revis, right?
I heard
Yeah.
that name be mentioned.
Yeah,
Okay.
in Isabel's class. And then Clay was in the kindergarten, and Kim was an assistant to Nancy DeBasic, and then Gina was doing a different kindergarten. And so about that time, I was working in other charter schools, other Waldorf schools, and other charter school initiatives. And then I remember floating around after leaving an education management organization. And I think I approached Amy, or Amy approached me, or somehow we just made a connection in some organic way. And I remember being contracted to write some grants. And so it was a sort of performance contract where, you know, we'll give you $10,000 a year and write us as many grants as you can and create as many initiatives and try to get as involved as you can and get us money. And I was sort of in between things. And so I accepted that job and really fell in love with the school on a different level, rather than being a dad and, you know, through a husband, you know, relationship connection. My kids were already gone by that time, but I became enamored with the school and the energy and the staff and the community. And so I started to throw myself into what is Desert Marigold School as part of those responsibilities, Amy, is to try to appeal to potential funders about, hey, here's this really cool school, and here's this initiative, and here's this grant, or here's this project we'd like you to support. And between, you know, some of those conversations, Amy, were so exciting and so promising, you know, reaching out for partnerships and collaborations and community connections to try to not just, I think this is really important, guys, not just support our school, but to make a difference in the community of where we lived, of where the school was housed. And that became a real big part of what that energy was about at that time. Long range plans that were, you know, strategies that were pointedly saying, how are we going to make the world a better place, you know, by our presence rather than just running a school? And so there was something really momentous for me personally about being involved in those conversations, and it really changed my life, you know, and changed my direction. And I became much more involved in what Waldorf education is, rather than simply on the periphery. And so from those moments, Amy, I began a new path and really have not strayed tremendously from that path in terms of my relationship with Waldorf education. And during that time, I worked on a bunch of projects. You know, we had the long range strategy going on. That was really a momentous moment to kind of chart that 5-year course. We started to reach out and partner with, oh, what was her name? Christina Yuri? Do you remember her? Yeah, she was from like Brazil or Colombia, somewhere in South America.
Costa Rica.
Costa
They're in
Rica.
Florida now.
Oh, are they? Okay. Well, Christina, she wasn't the only one. I mean, you know, the thoughts of high school, I mean, seriously, they began with Gerald. You know, when Gerald's kid graduated, he already started saying, when are we going to, can we get high school? You know, was that very first grade graduation class.
That leads right into my next question of what prompted the decision to expand to include a high school. And I pose that to all of you.
Well, I'll just finish mine, because I don't think there was a specific action. What I'm trying to assert here is from the very first graduating 8th grade, there was a clear impulse to open up a high school. You know, and I can't rationalize, you know, what those couple of families that were in that first graduating 8th grade class was about, but it was a love of what Waldorf was doing with their children. And they just wanted more. They wanted everything you could get, and said, how can I walk away from this after what this has done for my, and I've seen it in my own kids, you know, after what this education has created and given birth to in these children, every year there was an impulse to do this. But I do remember that year that I was writing stuff, I also was I stepped up and said, I'll be happy to do that because I've written charters before and the community knew that, I've started other charter schools. And so that became one of my corollary responsibilities, was working with Christine, but I don't think it was only her. There were a couple of others, Amy, but there were these initiatives that really went to the trouble of saying, let's go and get the application. Let's talk to the board. Let's talk to the faculty. Let's talk to the community in certain respect about what would it take to create a high school. And so, it had been living for quite a number of years before that fateful call where Amy called me at the Journey Charter School in Aliso Viejo and said, Mike, it's actually going to happen.
Amy, take it from there.
Okay. Well, I would actually go back to when the school Valley of the Sun Waldorf Education Association was incorporated. I think if you look at those articles of incorporation, it talks about a vision eventually, like of K-12, of the full education. So the seed of the idea that eventually it would be there, I think was there from the beginning, because there was a deep understanding of the whole of what was possible with Waldorf education. And Mike is actually absolutely right that I think the first 8th grade graduated in 2005. And every year, maybe, 6 months before graduating, there would be that question of, well, what can we do? Can there be a high school? And sometimes there would be parents who might get together and have a little working group for a while, or maybe they'd go visit an existing high school. And I think, Michael, when you said there was a difference for you between when you were relating to the school just as a parent, and which is a wonderful thing, and when you also had a vision that was less about that and more about what can a school mean for a community. This is not about it being for my children. This is about it being an option for all children. And what began to happen, I think, over the years was a group began to coalesce that didn't just die off or fade away when their child couldn't go to high school and could go someplace else. It began to include community members. It began to include faculty members. It began to include inviting high school experts to the school to talk about how starting a high school isn't basically just like adding a grade 9, just adding another grade. It's actually a whole process of understanding developmentally what a high school needs to be to serve students. And so I think, so there began to be this sort of sense of looking at that class that was going to graduate in 2009, that class might actually be a class that could be a first 9th grade, that could be a foundation for a high school going forward. And then as that began to seem more clear, all of the other pieces about where it might be and what needed to be put in place, what capacities needed to be built, they came into play too. And also, Barb, you were mentioning this before we actually started, we were finding that we could attract early childhood students. People were very enthusiastic about grades, but as you moved into the middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, without a high school to go into, families would sometimes transition out at 5th grade. And so there was also this understanding that we might really be able to solidify a middle school with a high school option. And that absolutely became the case.
Awesome. Thank you. Jimmy, Jill, what do you guys want to jump in? I don't know if one of you was the president at the time, I imagine. Who would like to go next?
Well, I was a school board president at that time, and I would just echo what Amy just said. I mean, when we looked at our numbers, we were losing kids 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. The ASAs, the NSAs, the charter schools that typically our graduates, 8th grade graduates would often go to, they were opening up their entrance younger. So whereas they were originally just a high school charters 9 through 12, they also realized that they could capture kids younger. So they extended their charter down into 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, some of them. And when they did that, you could get in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, but to get into 9th grade, into those schools was much more difficult. So the parents had to make a decision. Maybe that's not what they wanted to do, but they knew because we didn't have a high school option, that was the only way that they could get into what they consider to be a viable option for them for high school, because we didn't have a high school.
Thank you. Jimmy, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so by the time I joined on the board, the high school idea and everything was already solidified. It was in the process of going at that point. But right from the beginning, when we joined the school, the discussion was, we should have a high school, okay? Because if you are invested in Waldorf education, where do you stop? Do you only stop it at 8th grade? Do you stop it at 9th grade? Where do you stop at that point? And that entire discussion of losing children earlier and earlier. And I remember at one point we were talking about losing children in 5th grade, and it made total sense why we're losing children at that point. So having a high school and looking at the future of Waldorf education in the Valley was really important. And at the same time, because we had no other high school in Arizona that was providing Waldorf education. So it made it really important to actually support that and just run with it as much as we can and getting it to the point where it is right now.
Great, thank you. Well, my next question, and Jimmy, if you want to go ahead and start with it since we've got you here. What were the initial expectations for the size and scope of the school, if you recall?
The school or the high school?
The high school.
The high school, okay.
Sorry.
So, we were from the beginning, we were hoping that we will get it to about 100 students. The idea was if we can get 25 kids per grade moving up, okay, that will get us to the 100 students, at one point. But right from the beginning, it wasn't open all 4 grades. It was, let's start with 9th grade, and then every year we add on a grade. So we start with the 9th grade and move on from there. We didn't expect it to be huge. We were very realistic. We knew that we're probably going to start with about 10, 12 students to begin with, and then start building on from there and getting more the parents in the younger grades excited about the high school, understand what the high school has to offer, and add additional students each year.
Nice, thank you. Does someone else want to jump onto this question? Mr. Martin? Oh, Amy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just agreement about knowing that to be of a certain size, the idea of 20 or 25 students per grade made a lot of sense, and also worked with the space that we were kind of growing into with the high school. I don't remember too many conversations about trying for a vision of a larger high school at the time. It was really always a single track high school in those early days. And I don't know where the conversations are now.
And I think that we had that number 25 each class because that's what the space could hold. When we purchased the house and converted it into the high school, just with so many square feet, that was kind of seemed like, a number that could work for the space, and that could be, that would work with the staff that we had.
So could I ask a question on that? Which came first? Was it the idea about a high school or was it the purchase of the property? How did that unfold?
Well, I think you've heard the people have been talking about the high school for a very long time. And I mean, over the decades. And when we decided to do one, it wasn't like, the board said, okay, one meeting, we're going to have a high school, and the next meeting there was a high school. I mean, the charter had to be extended. The charter had to be either extended, and at that time, there was an option that you could form another charter. And was it $100,000, Amy? That we could have gotten $100,000, but it would have been a separate charter, which meant that our K through 8 charter students would have to reapply like they did in kindergarten. And we all know what that was like, trying to get your number to get a space. And so we made the decision at the board to say, you know what? It's not worth it. Our students have been with us, if they've been with us through playgroup through 8th grade, that we really want this to be a continuum. So we extended our charter from K to 8 through K through 12. And the
I'm
house,
so grateful you made that decision.
go ahead,
Yeah,
Michael.
I have to speak up and say I was 100% emphatically against that decision. I was totally in a position of saying this high school is an economic necessity for itself as well. And I struggled as a high school and a charter school developer for the previous 20 years. I struggled with that decision mightily. That I understand what you're saying about the school is for our graduating 8th grade, but I feel that hit, and Jill, my numbers were more around 150 to 200,000 a year for 3 years in the stimulus grant program. That's what charter schools were getting at that time. In addition, I'm just laying it out there, okay? In addition, you would get small schools funding. Every kid you add on until you get to 499, you get less money per kid. The smaller schools get more money because they're small rural schools. So there's a funding formula from Arizona would say if you had a school of 100, you're going to get an extra $250 for each one of those 100 kids, more than if you just throw them on top of an existing 300 school, which is what we basically were doing. So not only did we lose that stimulus money, we lost in perpetuity somewhere around a couple $100 a kid because it was blended on top of the K through 8 enrollment. So I'm just saying, I struggled with that decision. And I think there's something important, I don't know for posterity's sake here or whatever, but the position that prevailed, I think speaks to something, guys, pretty strongly above what I'm referring to. And I don't know, what that means other than, Barb, you said, thank goodness. So.
Yeah, I mean, I understand from a business point of view, Michael, you thinking, if you feel in the way that you did, definitely from a parent perspective like myself, to be invested for 8 years with a particular foundation and then not to be able to have the opportunity to get that lucky pick would, I think, be devastating, Mr. Martin.
Just saying.
But thank you. So Jill, did you want to say anything else about the size and scope of the high school? Any other expectations?
So Amy, why don't you talk about, there was a family, one of our families that had the high school property, and Robin and
Hand. Yeah, Robin Hand.
And anyway, Peter. Yes. And I think their daughter went to ASA, right? They were moving. And so they said, would you like to buy the property? So Amy.
Sure. And I'll just actually step back from there a little bit because I think it was 2005 when the school purchased the 5 acres closest to South Mountain. So what we then called the Crabtree property. And that happened with first there was a small LLC that was formed for a year that bought an option from Mike Crabtree to give the school the time to figure out how to make the purchase. And so that had been accomplished through, in part through a loan with RSF, an additional loan, and in part through some community debt, families doing some kind of friends and family type debt to the school. And from the plans at that point were very ambitious. It was to do the remodel of the administrative office, which happened, the parking lot, which happened. We talked about that in the last historical Zoom, just about what it meant to try to do a permeable surface and how hard we had to work with the city to accomplish that. But there was also going to be a music room and eurythmy room and other classrooms. It was an ambitious, multi-phased project, and funding beyond what was used for the admin building in the parking lot was initially secured from RSF. And then what happened was, with the 2008 downturn and financial crisis, the value of the property, which was collateral for the loan, dropped substantially. And so at the time, RSF was not comfortable basically with financing the remainder of the money that would have been used for those construction plans. And so all of that then was on hold. But then when, like Jill said, the opportunity to purchase the property where the high school is now came up, that was something where, again, Desert Marigold had this long-term relationship with RSF as a lender starting in 1996. RSF was comfortable making a loan because you would have, with the purchase of additional property, there was additional collateral, which made the loan work in a way that just doing additional building didn't. And so in a very short period of time, it was basically, if we as a community could raise 20% of the purchase cost, I don't remember what it was, that we could get a loan for the rest of us, for the rest of it. And I remember people just being really excited about it, seeing the possibility, seeing what it would mean in terms of a future for the high school and other kinds of things. And literally people would just come into the office, and Jamie Shaver had this bucket or box or something, and people would just put money and checks in it. And it happened because there was a level of enthusiasm. It wasn't just, a few of us who thought it was a good idea. It was a community that just got inspired.
And wasn't it $15,000 in like 10 days that had to be raised? Not by one person either, but it had to be by, a number of people. Like nobody could write one check. We had to have as many community members as possible in 10 days in order to secure that high school property. That was 10 days.
Just recently, I was looking through some files and I found the flyer that we had to raise that money for that property. And it was just amazing. It reminded me how much and how quickly the community came together to gather that amount. And I mean, people were reaching out to their families and saying, hey, would you sponsor this? Would you help out with this? And and the community just got together very quickly, got that loan, and were able to, secure that funding at that point because we had that 20% down payment.
Now, somebody walk me through the timetable here, because, I remember year one was in the farmhouse. So when did this decision for the hands happen? And how come the high school went forward? Did the high school go forward thinking that they were going to build the high school, as I've heard, in the southwest corner of the 5 acres, the Crabtree property? And so that was the direction the high school was going. Then the crash happens, and then the charter is already in process because it takes a year to go through that. And so there's this moment where, well, we can't back off. We don't have another property. RSF is not going to give us the money for that southwest corner to develop. So let's get some kids and just throw them in the farmhouse. Right? Is that how this all gels out?
Right. And then I called you at Journey and said, we'll throw him in the farmhouse too, right?
Right. Okay, so the hand property wasn't available. This was still the first year of the high school is in the state of flux of saying we're going forward, but we don't know where we're going to be, right? And that's why the second year we're in the administration office while those kids are actually demolishing Robin's house.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember during the summit in, I think it was in 2005, 2006, when we had the big summit and we were talking about the plans and you guys shared the plans of, the future buildings and all that kind of stuff. And that was the vision that we all had, at the time. But then obviously, you started developing the plan to have the high school and we were going with it. And I recall being on the board when the hand property became available. And that's when it was like, all right, you know what? A decision needs to be made very quickly now. Which way do we want to go? Do we want to try to do more of development and try to bring in more money so we can build it there, or buy this property? And now you've got something that you can remodel and make it into a high school. And it just from a dollar and cents, it just made a lot more sense to go that way. And that's how we took off with that idea. Because the phase 3 of the original plan was not going to happen because of the downfall.
Right. And I actually remember making arguments to RSF that, because again, RSF had a long enough relationship with Desert Marigold that they knew that we would have these 5-year plans, and what happened at the end of the 5 years was very different from what we thought it was going to be, which is the case with virtually all organizations. But just really, really making the case that even if for some reason the high school didn't work, what was available on that property would really benefit the school as a whole in terms of specialty classrooms and possibilities. Just that it was a next step that could support multiple possibilities. And the one that we wanted it to support was really being the place, sort of that incubator place for the growing high school, but that it was a move, purchasing that property, that would make sense under multiple scenarios.
Great, thank you. Guys, would you like to share favorite memories of building the high school? I can testify, I think when my daughter, who was part of the first graduating class, she joined sophomore year and 2 classes were upstairs in the admin building. I was just, one of those moms that put everything in her faith bucket and went with it. And it was amazing and has been. So I really appreciate the creativity that made it all happen. Who would like to go first? Michael, you want to talk about some favorite moments in the becoming of the high school? Or challenges, whichever comes to mind.
Yeah, I would have a difficult time, selecting any, small number. I mean, there's such a sense of being part of something that has been really unique in my life and life-changing. And what makes it so momentous in my life upon reflection, and has impacted me moving forward, that's why I'm here, is because there's a glimmer of hope that I can recapture some of that incredible wonderful, unique quality of building something with a community. Amy would, and others would know this very well from those first moments of decision of saying, and Amy, you were one of the big voices here of moving to 28th Street rather than other properties. You know, that energy of building something from the ground up as part of a community is more than a memory. It is something that has changed the course of my relationship to my work, that no longer am I satisfied having a job. I have to be part of a community that is embracing action leading to a vision for the future. And building that high school that I was blessed to be part of is the culmination of all of those hundreds and hundreds of memories that connect me with that community. You know, those kids and those parents that I went on trips with and slept in vans with, and, you know, had all these experiences, and, you know, took sledgehammers and put on safety glasses and threw our, you know, bodies through walls to have a good time while we're destroying this house. And then, you know, digging holes and creating spaces out of closets, and, you know, just all of that creative action and effort is beyond description. It really defies me trying to figure out how to say one of those memories is the most, you know, the most cherished. I mean, they all are so clear to me and culminate in just this experience, other than a part where I left for a while. But other than that, you know, a full decade of my life committed to and being part of a community creating something. And so, you know, that's about as close as I could really narrow it down, you know, and it defies being narrowed down.
Thank you. Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add? We've got about a little less than or a little more than 10 minutes left, guys.
Sure. Well, I really relate to what you're saying there, Michael, about what it means to be part of building something, of creating something. I remember earlier than the high school, probably in the first year or two of moving to 28th Street, doing the enrollment work and having a family come and look at, you know, the dirt piles and the construction and all of that, and decide not to come because they felt that the school being under construction would somehow be a detriment to their child's education. And I always felt that as good as what my children experienced in the classroom, that part of their education was all that happened outside the classroom, on the weekends, on the holidays, over the summer, when we were all gathering together, families and community members and people who were just interested in what we were doing to build the school. Seeing us as adults go through the ups and downs and still find a way to work together, to learn to do new things, that was the education that my children got. And I can't imagine a better education than that.
Thank you. Awesome. Jill?
Gosh, I mean, it's hard to add to both of those. Yeah, just, I mean, just so many experiences that really shaped who I am as where I am right now in my life. And, you know, glimmers of, you know, I see what our children are doing, definitely have been influenced by not the pretty, shiny, nice penny school, but rather the dirt piles and the scorpions and I mean, I don't know, like we all have stories, like, and so many of them, but yeah, I feel really blessed that we were part of, got to be part of that. And again, I think we all keep saying this community. We hear that now, or some of my other circles, that how do we make community, and people crave community. And I think, oh my gosh, I just feel so fortunate that I wasn't even looking for a community. I didn't know I needed a community, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And then feel, again, all of us have been involved with this school for decades, and we still are feeling the effects of having that community. And I think we said it in some of the other series, it wasn't always perfect. No, not everybody agreed, but it was a space, we learned to disagree, but to still work beside each other. I mean, there was a lot of work that had to be done.
And Jimmy, the last parent that still has a couple students left at our school.
Absolutely. So the biggest thing about the high school, like that I can remember, it was an obstacle. We had made plans on how we're gonna build the high school or remodel that property and all that kind of stuff. And we're going with septic tanks because that was approved and everything. And at the last minute, the city gives us a notice that no, you cannot use septic. Now you have to actually hook up to the sewer. Okay. So that project by itself was, it was a big setback to look at it and to try to figure out how we're going to fund this all of a sudden. And the community again came together and was able to raise enough funds with getting additional loans. Okay, we were able to do it and make it happen and just kept moving. It delayed us a little bit about getting started, or at least finishing the project. Okay, and I still recall that the day that the school started, we're still waiting on the inspector to give the final approval of that building. And we're standing there at 7:30 waiting on that inspector, and the inspector comes by, gives the approval, and we're able to open up the school and say, all right, welcome children. So it's just amazing seeing the community always come together and how things work out in the end. And that is a memory that always stuck with me, was this project.
Well, thanks, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up? I mean, for one, we've got so many originals here. I don't know, in reflecting back at this K through 12 public charter, Waldorf-inspired school, only school like it in the nation. I mean, any thoughts on the magnitude of that alone? And I'll just interject, recently on a talk, and I've heard Joan say this before. I've actually heard a few people say these before. Joan said when she was showing other people around, other teachers, she would bring them to our school because in her mind, it was the best example she felt, or these might be my words, but of a functioning Waldorf school and community. I thought that was pretty amazing to hear. And I had oftentimes heard people say, our public charter Waldorf inspired school is more Waldorf than than most private schools, because at the time when this was being said, we had a speech artist, we had a eurythmist, and we might have even had Terry DeSario at the time. And you don't know what you've got until it's gone, but that's pretty amazing. What do you guys think about that?
I think a big testament, I guess, to the Desert Marigold school as a whole, but absolutely the high school as well, is that it for a moment in time, It was first and the only one of its kind. And here in less than, a little bit over a decade later, there are no fewer than, I know of 6 to 8 initiatives or schools that now feel the courage, now feel and take for granted they don't take it for granted, but they take advantage of a knowledge that it can be done. It had not been done when Desert Marigold did this. As a matter of fact, there were more failures for high schools in the public sector than there were successes for that Waldorf model. The Watershed High School in Minneapolis opened up for just a very brief few months, and then it kind of boomed. The Milwaukee, anyway, there were a couple of schools, but somehow what Desert Marigold did in all the different ways it did it has changed the course, really, in my estimation, of Waldorf education, where there is rarely a K through 8 high school administrators meeting that I go to that, if for any length of time for more than a couple of hours, someone starts to have a conversation about high school. Because now it's there. It has occurred. It has succeeded. It has resonated and reverberated out to such an extent that people don't even know where it came from. People don't even recognize, oh, there was a first. There was a school and a community that had the wherewithal to say, we're just going to do it. And I don't know what that quality was, but I can only say thank you to all of you for allowing me to be part of whatever that magical moment was. I cherish it, guys, like I cherish all of you. That was just a magical moment in my life. And that magic, I think, has reverberated out in the Waldorf movement to degrees that we will not appreciate in our lifetime. But we're seeing it already. Just amazing.
Thank you.
So as a parent of 3 children, of whom have been at DMS, and having a child that just graduated, she started when she was 2 years old in playgroup and going all the way through high school and graduating from high school and seeing the person that she became. And knowing that the school had a huge effect on that. Okay, I'm very proud of the school and very proud of the teachers and the community and the support that everybody provides that school, because watching those children grow up at that location and becoming the people they are, the person they are, is just an amazing feeling.
Thank you. True. Jill?
Yeah, all I wanted to say is, if you're going to do another installment in this series, I really think the next installment needs to be the alums.
Oh, awesome.
It needs to be a conversation like this with the students and them talking about their experiences.
Really, I totally agree. And especially because, you think every year had its specialness, even with the first graduating class being so small. And, some people feel like, well, they were the spoiled ones, they got to go everywhere they wanted on every field trip, compared to when we were more established. We had a bigger high school, a lot more electives, and some people might feel like that would have been, so it would be so interesting to see each of those graduating classes perspectives, especially if you were with my daughter. She's had now 2 younger siblings graduate, and each one of them had an extremely different experience, and they were all wonderful. So I'm really excited about that idea. We'll keep you posted. Jill, any final thoughts before we end our interview, chapter 3? high school?
Nothing. I mean, I don't think I can't add to anything that anybody has said, but I do have some regrets from from the founders talk, in that I didn't thank everybody that I was with. I am so thankful to have walked this journey with you guys. Really just honored and blessed. And again, I am a different person because of the fun, the trials, all the situations that we went through. And I wouldn't have done it any other way. And I'm so glad that I got to do that with all of you.
You speak my heart, Jill.
Yeah, same here.
Well, guys, I really thank you for your time. This was amazing. I can't wait to share it with our community. And Mr. Martin, I might be hitting you up when it's time for interviewing the alumni.
I'd love to be part of that.
Great idea.
Okay, thank you guys. If you'll hold on for a minute and I'll stop our recording.
Thank you.